So we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but we do have our next author here with us. We've got Kathryn, who's going to be reading from her work, The Secret About Time. Kathryn, are you ready to go ahead and get started?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciated author Miko Marsh's comments. And I agree with a lot of what she said and belong to a few of those organizations myself. All right. So today I'm going to be reading from my first novel, which is called The Secret About Time. The Secret About Time is a very special book to me. It came out in 2019 and is really a love letter to two places that I hold very dear in my heart, and that of course is I have a nod to Virginia. I spent a lot of time growing up in South Louisiana and on Cape Cod, including the outer islands. Um, and the sequel to this book came out this past June, which is simply a matter of time. And so I'm going to be reading the first chapter from this book today, and then maybe I can talk a little bit about it afterwards. Chapter 1. Austin Brooks walked into the school's old library, still wiping the dust from his hands. "You wanted to see me, sir?" His voice echoed up to the vaulted ceiling, surpassing the tall bookshelves. Principal John Clarkson and Laurie Michaels, the librarian, sat at the circulation desk looking at the screen of the brand-new computer. Austin walked through the patches of August sun, beaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, which overlooked the oaks on the front lawn of Bright Rock Island's only school. "You look like you've been busy," Laurie said, peering at Austin over her red-rimmed glasses. "Yeah, I had to squeeze in another bookcase in the office from my classroom. Stole the spare from under the stage, so what's up?" Austin eyed John. Following the chain of command was an old habit from his time in the Navy that had never let him down. "I hired someone to fill Lizzie's spot." "Hey, that's great! Just in time with school starting next week. Who stepped up?" The lines on John's face seemed to deepen as he stared at Austin. "We had to go with someone from off the island." Austin stopped dead. "You can't be serious." John stared at him, his expression grave. "I am." Austin felt his jaw go slack. "How? Why?" "Didn't have a choice. I could have." John held up his hand, silencing Austin, who ground his teeth in response. "I looked at it from every possible angle. The new federal law requires we have someone certified in the new trauma-informed care now. Can't just be anyone. And they have to be physically present. The council wasn't happy, but they approved the decision. The teacher we fired, what's her name again, Laurie?" Laurie and John looked about the same age, hovering somewhere near retirement. But that's what made hiring someone from the mainland a problem. At almost 370 years old, John had been around longer than most of the people on their small New England island. People who lived on Bright Rock didn't age like they were supposed to, and hiring an outsider had never happened before. Laurie jiggled the mouse and peered at the screen again. "Caitlin Landry. Right. Caitlin meets the requirements and has a great resume and no surviving family. Laurie researched her. Googled, John. It's called Googled. Thank you, Laurie. Googled her. Looks like the parents are both dead. No siblings." Austin folded his arms and narrowed his eyes, even though he knew he shouldn't. "So how can this work? What if she," Austin waved one hand around in the air, "you know, finds out about us?" "That's where you come in." John leveled a sharp gaze at Austin. Austin was about to ask him why, when Laurie brought up exactly what he didn't want to remember. "You're the one with the most experience with outsiders," Laurie said. Austin swallowed and itched to pop a knuckle, but crossed his arms in front of him. That was a long time ago, not to mention how badly it ended. "None of us have been in close contact with the outsiders as long as you were. Sailing around on a ship for 4 years and God knows where makes you the best bet." Austin shifted his weight, but still couldn't get comfortable. "You can't expect me to cover for everyone." None of the students know until just before graduation, Lori said, looking over the circulation desk while taking off her glasses. We're pretty good at keeping secrets. You'll just be a little insurance. There's no way an adult can live on the island for an entire school year and not find out, Austin said, shaking his head. Well, I'm going to need you to make sure of that. Don't let her get too nosy, John said as he pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his suit jacket and spun it on the lemon-waxed polished wood. Austin propped his hands on his hips. What about renewals? How am I supposed to explain when everyone disappears to a secret meeting? John didn't meet his eyes, still focused on the spinning pen. It's done. I've already sent her a contract. She signed. Besides, she's arriving on the next ferry. I need you to go pick her up and take her to her apartment. Wait, she has an apartment? Lizzie agreed to rent her space out. Car 2. Here's the keys. Lori held her hand out, dangling the little cluster for him to take. Austin recognized his cousin's apartment, classroom, and car key on a key ring decorated with a scoop of pink ice cream on a cone. He could have throttled Lizzie for leaving, even though everyone knew she'd been asking for a chance to get away for years. But the sooner she got her certification, the sooner Kathryn Landry could leave. With no choice, Austin took the keys and shoved them in his pocket. John, I don't like this. I don't see anything good coming of it. John sucked in a breath. We're counting on you. Austin felt like a trap had closed in on him. He never talked about what happened in the Navy, but of course FDR's fireside chats and NBC gave everyone a basic idea of America's fight against the Japanese. Maybe if they knew the details, they would reconsider. Looking down at the keys in his palm, he felt like his plan to avoid everyone from off the island was slipping away. I'm really not sure I'm the right person for this. Austin, you look close to her age. I'm turning 100. John nodded and spoke slowly, in a patronizing tone that made Austin want to run. He ground his molars instead. I know, but you look her age. She'll relate to you. Austin shook his head. I don't know about that. Kathryn Landry gripped the weathered railing of the ferry and squinted at the dark, churning waters beyond the bow. Her other hand clung to the handle of her only suitcase. Wind tangled her hair in a swirl around her head as the late August sun shone down hard on the deck. Gulls wafted overhead on the breeze and called down to where the sea slapped the hull, rocking everyone on the ferry left and right. An old white lighthouse on a rocky precipice, bathed in the golden afternoon sun, welcomed the ferry to the postcard-perfect New England Bay of an almost forgotten island. The crisp bite in the air brightens Kathryn's soul. So accustomed to the lazy, hazy, sweltering August heat, Kathryn welcomed the change. Harsh New England accents and the broad blue Atlantic reminded her nothing of home, which was precisely what she wanted. A dozen yachts coasted on each gentle swell, the sun glinting off their polish and chrome. Glimpses of mansions with gray cedar shingles poked out over the high, grass-covered dunes. Their stellar windows no doubt drinking in the view. Underneath her feet, the roar of the engines died to a purr. The crew began scuttling about, throwing ropes to each other as the large ferry coasted towards the land, where a long wooden dock led up to a row of preserved old shops and buildings, each with a unique sign hanging above the door. Excuse me, miss. An older man carrying a walkie-talkie and wearing a faded ferry polo leaned over to get her attention. His weathered skin matched the ropes she had seen on deck. Gray hair escaped out from under the brim of a faded, sweat-stained baseball cap that matched the polo. On his chest, white letters spelled out the name, Mark. You the one heading to Bright Rock? Caught off guard, she stumbled over her words. Yes? Is there a problem? She reached for her brown satchel to retrieve her ticket. He held up his hand, which looked more like a baseball glove, to stop her. We just don't get that many people who have a one-way ticket. Wanted to double-check. Usually round trip, same day. His brown eyes studied her, intent on waiting for her answer. That's right. It's, just one way. The statement sounded strange to her ears. Like an official declaration she was leaving her old life behind with no intention to return. He massaged one hand with the other. Caitlin opened her mouth to say something, but he nodded once and ambled away slower than the younger crew members, who were rushing about in preparation for their arrival. 2 new text messages popped up on her phone, taking her attention away from him. Both were from Caleb. By now, he'd figured out what she'd done. Guilt lapped at her gut, and she shoved the emotion aside, along with all the other ones that had been haunting her. Caitlin hit delete without even reading them, and swiped to scan information about where to find Austin Brooks, who was supposed to meet her. She hadn't needed to, though. Looking out, she could see only one man, leaning against a truck, his arms folded in front of his chest, watching the ferry coast into port. With a lurch, their forward motion ceased. Caitlin released her death grip on the rail and made her way to the edge to disembark. She expected there to be a mass exodus of shuffling feet, but the remaining passengers all stayed on board. Leaning over the rail, they took in the views and snapped pictures of the quaint shops below, but no one followed her down the metal gangway. She was barely on dry land when the engines from the ferry roared to life behind her, and Caitlin glanced over her shoulder to see the large white boat already coasting out of the small harbor. The sight made her feel utterly alone, but after the past few weeks she had become accustomed to the feeling, and squashed the thought like a roach in an old house. Straightening her spine, she slapped on a smile to make a good first impression and walked over to the man. "Austin Brooks, I presume?" The tall blonde studied her, his arms still folded in front of his broad chest, his chiseled face cold and unwelcoming. "Yep." Caitlin stuck out her hand in greeting. "Caitlin Landry, nice to meet you." Austin looked down with a small sneer on his face, reminding her of a schoolyard bully. The scar on his chin made him look like someone she didn't want to mess with. Caitlin was about to take her hand back when he took it in his own. The warm, strong hand swallowed hers. Up close, he smelled clean like aftershave and something spicy. The firm, callous handshake ended too soon, but the sensation of his skin touching hers lingered. Caitlin shook her head to clear it and watched Austin to see if he had the same reaction. Austin looked surprised, but with a slight frown, as if he hadn't expected or appreciated whatever had just happened. "Well, thanks for meeting me here. Lori Michaels said you're the new assistant principal. Congratulations." His frown deepened. Caitlin felt her smile falter before she reminded herself whoever had pissed in his cornflakes, it wasn't her. Still, it wasn't really a great sign. "Where's your stuff?" he asked, eyeing her bag with suspicion. Caitlin wanted to give him a smart remark, but instead opted for a pleasant smile for her new, unpleasant boss. "This is everything. Lori said the place was furnished?" "It is." "Okay, great." Caitlin smiled again, waiting for him to make the next move. According to Lori's email, Austin was supposed to be her welcoming committee. So far, if this was it, she was pretty much screwed. Caitlin would have considered getting back on the boat if she had anything worth going back to. "Well, at least you know how to pack," Austin said, reaching down to take it for her, but Caitlin pulled away. "I'm good. Thanks anyway." Well, it might not look like much. It was everything that was left from her life before. Austin shrugged, like he couldn't have brought himself to care, even if she'd flung herself in the ocean. "Is the apartment nearby?" she asked to break the awkward silence. "Yep, sure is." He led her down a brick sidewalk. Closer now, Caitlin memorized all the shops as they walked past Kate's Diner and over to the Two Scoops ice cream parlor. The small, gray, cedar shingle building faced the harbor with a bright yellow door, flanked by 2 half-barrels overflowing with flowers that swayed in the sea breeze. Caitlin followed Austin past the entrance and the large picture windows that looked in on a few tables and chairs in front of a counter that held an array of flavors behind the glass. At the corner of the building, the bricks continued straight, following the road towards a small gas station, but Austin turned down an alley where a red Ford Escape sat parked next to a staircase that led up to a second floor of an ice cream parlor. He spun around. "Catch!" He tossed the keys that he had been twirling. Caitlin reached out instinctively and felt the metal hit her palm before she fumbled a few times with them. She looked down into her hands. Sure enough, a car key and fob sat next to 2 other keys, one brass-colored and one silver. A keyring adorned with a scoop of pink ice cream held everything together. "Classroom, apartment, and a car?" Caitlin asked, looking up unsure. Yep, Austin said, opening the door to the escape. The teacher you're replacing didn't want to take it with her. Lori said I wouldn't need a car, though. Austin sighed and looked like he was grinding his teeth instead of biting her head off. Look, on small islands this isn't that weird. It's too much trouble to get cars off and on the mainland. Did you have a car? I sold it. Great, so this works out. Let's head up to the apartment. Can I get your bag, or do you want to be stubborn? I'm not going to feel weird if you're lugging this thing up there while I watch, so I'm going to ask again. May I please carry your bag for you? He looked irritated, like this whole welcoming committee thing was taking far too long. Caitlin bit her lip. Thanks? That'd be great, I guess? Austin grabbed her luggage before bounding up the exterior stairs, taking them two at a time, to another yellow door. Caitlin followed at a much slower pace, walking into a small living room that led to an eating kitchen with exquisite furnishings. Austin set her bag down and held out his hands wide. So, what do you think? Caitlin looked around at the small space adorned with plush tan chairs with blue and white pillows in front of a white coffee table. Behind them, two large windows framed with white shears looked out over the picturesque harbor with white yachts dotted the blue water like clouds in the sky. The kitchen was all white too, except for the stainless appliances, and a small white table and chairs sat next to the kitchen in front of another window that looked out onto the same scene. All of it felt light, airy, and very expensive. Caitlin bit her lip and looked at the light wood floors covered by a rug she hadn't noticed. The money from the house and the furniture had paid off some of her debts, but there was still a lot more she owed. It's beautiful, but I can't afford this. She glanced up at Austin, sorry she had to disappoint him. But to her surprise, he grinned at her. His smile could have knocked her flat. Without the cold, calculating look, his face transformed from someone you didn't want to piss off to one of the most handsome men she'd ever seen. Oh, you can, he said with a quick nod, as if that settled everything. Besides, you don't have a choice. This place is your only option. And that is the first chapter from my contemporary romance with magical realism, which is called The Secret About Time.
That was great, Kathryn. Thank you so much for that reading. JR, does anyone have any questions or comments for Kathryn? Do you want to tell us anything about your writing process, about the publishing, the other works that you have?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I guess first we'll just start with this book. This was my very first published book, but not my first complete work. The idea for this book, actually, I had gone to New York with my 6-month infant, no less, because I had scheduled a meeting for another work with some agents and editors. And it was a very memorable experience, a very powerful experience of being told that that wasn't a great fit for what they were looking for right then. And so I had just come all that way from Virginia with my infant. And on the train ride back home, Amtrak, I was sitting there and my infant had finally fallen asleep. And I was looking at this and I was like, well, it felt like a complete waste of time and just very devastating being put politely and professionally rejected in person. But it's definitely a growth moment for me because I was like, well, I can't deal with writing right now. Let me just look for a place to go vacation. And I found a Airbnb on a small island called Tuckernuck, where not very many people live. And that picture just sort of stood out to me. And I was like, wow, I bet they have a lot of secrets there. And I just considered, what if they happened to have a fountain of youth and what would that look like? And when I got home, I ended up writing this book. And I then said, well, there's plenty of people who do this on their own. And they said they're not looking for contemporary romance right now. So, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And I joined Virginia Romance Writers, which I am a very active member and would encourage everybody to reach out. They are very welcoming and have guest speakers every meeting, which is the first Saturday of every month. They're now virtual. And I asked around and I educated myself and read online and started a website and started a blog where I documented my journey. I hired an editor, I hired a cover designer, and I learned how to do everything myself. and attended conferences and just kind of, I wanted to learn as much as possible about what I was getting into. And one quote that stands out for me was when I went to hear New York Times bestselling author J.R. Ward say that she loved the idea of independent publishing because she felt that women, in particularly, she loved anything where a woman didn't need permission to live her dream. And I absolutely loved that. So I educated myself. I found myself an editor where I had my developmental and copy edit. Then I hired a proofreader, and I published my first book on July 30th, 2019, and then promptly went ahead and did it again for the sequel this past year. And it's been an amazing journey and one that I am truly thankful for. And it's such a feeling of empowerment. And, I just love that. No one needs permission to live their dream. We all can do it.
And JR, what's coming up next?
Great question. So I have actually, I'm starting a new series. So in addition to continuing the Bright Rock Island series, where we will be looking at kind of going back in time to look at some of the characters we've met previously and what Bright Rock used to look like when it was first founded in the colonial period, as well as during Revolution and War of 1812 and the Civil War. In addition to those novellas, I am also working on a new series, which will be a contemporary romance with more magical realism elements. This one is going to be set in Montana and focuses on 3 women who are at different points in their life. And each of them are average women with average jobs in a first responder capacity. One is an EMT, one is a firefighter, and one is a police officer. But they all have a secret power. And it's going to follow their journey of how they come to terms with that power, reconcile that power, explore that power, save people, and also end up saving themselves through love.
Wonderful. Can you tell everyone where to find?
Absolutely. So published wide, so my work can be purchased anywhere at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. I'm currently working on getting an audiobook version of all of my works. I also blog regularly at KathrynKMurphy.com, and you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where I like to interact with people and just kind of, converse about publishing, writing, life in general. I'm also a teacher as a day job and a mom. So just talking about, kind of my journey and making time to write when it seems like there's no time at all.
Truth. Go ahead and put those links in the chat so that folks can find them there. And was there anything else you wanted to?
Sure. I think one thing that author Miko Marsh had mentioned previously that I really liked was talking about sprints. And, it's amazing. If you want to learn how to get something done, you need to talk to somebody who's very, very busy. And I learned that when I had my son, he would take a nap for 20 minutes. So I had 20 minutes to write. So I'd set a timer. And for that 20 minutes, I don't look at social media. I don't look at my phone. And you'd be amazed at how much it adds up, just a little chunk at a time. My mom always said, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. That's it.
I like that saying. All right. Well, thank you so much. And hope you enjoy the rest of your day.